A growing anti-vaccine movement in the United States has health officials concerned that deadly infectious diseases like measles, rubella, and whooping cough could return. Anti-vaccine activists claim a link between immunizations and autism. The medical establishment says there's no scientific evidence backing that theory. Still, some parents are opting out. Theresa Wrangham is the executive director of the National Vaccine Information Center, which is dedicated to preventing vaccine injuries and deaths through public education. Theresa, thanks so much for joining me via Skype today from Colorado. Tell me why you got involved in this fight and in this issue.
Well, partially because as a child I had a severe vaccine reaction and I had questions about what that might predispose my children to. And it was very difficult to find a physician to actually have that conversation with who actually had any knowledge of how a genetic predisposition that might have triggered my reaction may be inherited or not inherited by my children. So it was a journey to find out more, I guess is what's fair to say.
Did you decide to vaccinate your kids?
My kids were fully vaccinated until the age of 3, and then when I saw the research and the gaps in research in terms of risk, I decided to step back because in the meantime, my husband had also had a severe reaction. So I think we fall in that population that the Institutes of Medicine talks about in terms of special populations where there's a research gap to tell us, you know, a little bit more about what our risks might be.
And so, the vast majority of research on vaccines shows that they've been effective going back to the 1700s. You had the smallpox vaccine, but even with that, there's always some skepticism. People believe that the smallpox vaccine back then would actually turn them into a cow. That, of course, didn't happen. It saved lives. Do you have information to suggest otherwise, that these vaccines that have proven to be pretty effective at eradicating diseases actually or pose some sort of life-threatening risk?
Well, they can pose life-threatening risks. If you're not aware of it, there is the Federal Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund. That fund was created because our federal government acknowledged that there's no such thing as a 100% safe or effective vaccine. There are those that get injured. Our group actually put in place some of these safety provisions that exist in the federal law that created that program. In terms of what evidence do I have to suggest that there are issues, you have to look no further than the Institutes of Medicine last 2 reports. The last report looked at the safety of the recommended schedule for children in general. And the statements that they came out with, in essence, were that, you know, while vaccines are largely safe, there are people with individual susceptibilities for whom the risk may be that they get hurt or that they even die as a result of a vaccine.
Right.
You're really talking.
And so are you also someone who believes there's a connection between these vaccines, particularly MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, and autism?
Am I someone who personally believes?
Right.
I personally believe that autism is a behavioral diagnosis. It's not a medical condition. Can vaccines create an encephalopathy that the total outcome may be autism? We already know that's true. Hannah Pollings is the perfect example. She had an underlying mitochondrial condition, and the end outcome from the exacerbation of vaccines was autism. So you're not talking.
If you're a child who has a sort of is sort of pre-exposed to something or has some sort of underlying medical condition, that maybe a vaccine could exacerbate that.
Well, the Institutes of Medicine says that. Right. It doesn't really matter what I believe. The Institutes of Medicine has said that several times.
I'm just trying to clarify what you're saying.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
And it doesn't matter that I'm saying it. I think more importantly, the Institutes of Medicine is saying it. What MVIC stands for is informed consent. We're not an anti-vaccine organization. What we want consumers to realize is that like any medical procedure, and vaccination is a medical procedure, there's risk involved. There's risk involved if you decide not to vaccinate. You're talking about what level of risk are you willing to accept as a consumer. And in terms of risk, what you bring to the table, for example, in terms of risk, I couldn't even begin to tell you. I'm not going to tell you you should vaccinate or you shouldn't vaccinate. you should have a talk with a trusted health person in your life, a doctor or whoever you're going to, about vaccines. You should talk about what
do you
risks you're
say
bringing to the table.
Right, what do you say to doctors and scientists who say not getting a vaccine actually puts the sort of larger public at risk, especially when you're talking about school-age children who are in classrooms and in schools?
I would say, look at what happened in Washington. The pertussis outbreak, people were vaccinated. In fact, the CDC has come out very clearly and said that that outbreak is not being driven by people who choose not to vaccinate or choose alternative schedules in vaccination, and yet they're being demonized. They're being used as an example, even though the CDC has been very clear that it's a failure of the vaccine and not a failure to vaccinate.
And so what would you say, I mean, what sort of information do you think you need from scientists where you would feel like you could be in the position to counsel people to get vaccines and to say the vaccines were safe, the MMR vaccine, for instance?
Well,
I mean, you keep talking about sort of gaps in medicine.
That is not our mission. Our mission is not to convince people to vaccinate. Our mission is to get people to understand that when they decide that it's very important that they understand the risks and the benefits. Just like any medical procedure, there are risks and benefits. And very often, with regard to vaccination, it's very easy to find the benefit information. It's very difficult to find the risk information. And that is one of the reasons our website focuses on that. We want to provide one place where somebody can go and get both. We do focus on risk, but we link to the FDA and the CDC. A lot of what we link to is scientifically based, and you can go read it for yourself. We link to the most recent Institute of Medicine's paper that talk about the different levels of risk that we know and the many that are unknown and that require additional research. And until that research is in, I think you have to let parents make that decision. Informed consent is not about coercion and telling someone, do this because I'm telling you to. It's about you as an individual being a savvy consumer, gathering that risk-benefit information, deciding how does it affect you as an individual? What risk do you bring by virtue of who you are?
Right. I just, you talk about sort of gaps in the science. I just wonder if there ever will be enough science out there to have people feel like they can make enough of an informed
well,
decision.
I think that's a valid point in terms of, science is always going to be playing catch up. I think that's a fair point. However, I want to give you an idea of the scope of what I'm talking about. The Institutes
Theresa, quickly if you can.
Okay, the Institutes of Medicine did a review of the most common reported vaccine reactions, 158. For 85% of that, or 135, what they saw was there was not enough quality science or an absence of science for them to determine whether or not the vaccine reaction that was reported was indeed caused by the vaccine. That's not good news. That means that we're falling behind. We're not looking at it. People need to know, does this reaction, is it caused by that vaccine? For the 15% that they had adequate science to say yes or no on, over half, 78%, favored, yes, that vaccine caused X reaction. Those are big gaps. Those are not small gaps, and they should not be ignored. And the people who are injured, our injury
Theresa, I'm going to have to cut you off. You've been, informative. I appreciate you for sitting here with me today and talking about your organization. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Dr. Corey Hebert is the CEO of Black Health TV and assistant professor at Louisiana State University's Health Sciences Center. Dr. Hebert, he wrote a study on the impact of vaccines on public health, and he joins me now. Thanks so much, Dr. Hebert. Dr. Corey, I'm going to call you Dr. Corey.
Please do. Please do.
You're a doctor. You heard what Theresa had to say there. It seems like she's suggesting, A, that there are gaps in terms of the scientific research around vaccines, and that there's a certain segment of the population that maybe should be afraid of vaccines. What do you say to that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things here. Number one, we can use common sense, and I think a lot of people don't use common sense. We can think about, when is the last time you saw somebody walking around with polio? You haven't, have you? And the reason why is because of vaccines. People don't realize that 1.5 million people died in the United States alone in 1 year from the same influenza that we have today. What I find is that pop culture icons like Jenny McCarthy and a couple of others have used Dr. Wakefield. Well, let's just back up. His name is Mr. Wakefield now because he's not a doctor anymore.
This is the guy who had this study back in 1989 that made the link between autism and MMR. It was completely debunked.
Exactly. And so that's the only guy that's ever said this. But pop culture icons went on this tirade about this. And the problem is that you can't really take all that stuff back because it hit the pop culture so quickly. Now, let's look at the facts here. America may not even be here without vaccination and sanitation because of all of the serious diseases that have been almost eradicated because of vaccination. There are your guest said that it's very important that people understand the risks and the benefits, and they need to sign informed consents. Well, in the United States, it's against the law for me to give you a vaccine without you signing an informed consent already. That's already law in every state. So you have to get the risks and the benefits. We even have to give you some information in your hand on paper that you understand about the risks and benefits of vaccination.
So what are the dangers here? You talk about this sort of pop culture anti-vaccine movement that's afoot that in some ways is led by folks like Jenny McCarthy. What are the risks here if people buy into this idea that vaccines are a threat to their children? I mean, I think the rates are something like 85 to 99% across the country. Parents vaccinate their kids, but in smaller communities, in places like Colorado, folks are opting out.
Right. I mean, like she mentioned, the New York outbreak of pertussis that was said that was pinned to have been done because of a inactive vaccine. But let's talk about the Los Angeles pertussis outbreak that was only because of people not getting vaccinated. The risks are infection, obviously. The risks are a pain at the injection site. All the risks that we talk about. There's even a risk called Guillain-Barré syndrome that can cause you to have some paralysis in your body. And I'm not ever going to take those things away, but those things have been risk of vaccination from the beginning of time.
Right.
Okay, that's nothing new. That the thing that actually made this whole vaccination outcry was a physician in Britain who has been totally debunked on why he thinks vaccines should not be administered because it can cause your child to have autism, which is untrue.
Do you sense that there's anything at all to learn from folks who are skeptical about vaccines? If you look at the polio vaccine, for instance, early on there was an incident where somebody got the polio vaccine and the effects weren't good, so they changed it from a live vaccine to an inactive vaccine, right? I mean, is there any sort of template for that being true now with the vaccine skeptics?
Well, I'll tell you like this. I mean, we are always trying to advance science. That's important. And granted, with the polio vaccine, there was an oral polio vaccine, but we don't give that vaccine anymore. We give the inactivated injectable polio vaccine.
Right.
So what I want parents to do is to just talk to your grandmother. Talk to your great-grandmother and ask her about smallpox.
Yeah.
And ask her how many of her friends died from it. And ask her, why are you resting on the laurels of our ancestors because you don't want to vaccinate your children because you're listening to Jenny McCarthy and a debunked doctor. That's what I want them to do.
So is it a matter now of just like a PR war that you've got Jenny McCarthy maybe on one side and doctors and science and folks like you on the other?
Yes, there are, and there are some real, charlatan physicians that are pandering to their audiences that want to have that really flowery type of pediatric practice where you do whatever you want. Yeah, you can get a vaccine here. You're gonna have to get a vaccine there. They have a lot of those physicians out there, and you know what? We don't really accept them in our real scientific part of what we're doing here. And like I say to you, it is very clear that there are risks associated with anything. The number one cause of death from overdose in America is Tylenol. You don't care. You don't read the risks on Tylenol, but it's killing more people than vaccines could ever kill every year.
And
so
how worried are folks in the medical community about this? Is it sort of a fringe? I think it's something like we had a poll of 20% of folks believe that there's a connection between MMR and autism. I mean, how worried are folks in the medical community about this?
Well, we get pretty worried when we start seeing pockets of illness. For example, in Britain, they have many outbreaks since Dr. or Mr. Wakefield came out with his study, and they have pockets of outbreaks of MMR. And measles, mumps, and rubella are diseases that are very serious. The
Yeah.
measles can cause subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Nobody wants that.
I don't know
If
what
you're
that
not
is, but it sounds frightening.
exactly, it sounds bad. It is bad. Just like with the mumps, you can get orchitis, so you won't be able to have children. If you're a man, you won't be able to produce children. And rubella, if you're not rubella immune, your baby in utero can get rubella, and then they're stillborn. So that's a very serious illness. So we do not want people out there thinking, "Oh my gosh, I can't get MMR," when this vaccine has never been proven to do anything wrong to anyone. Now, don't get me wrong, and we have to say, there are risks associated, but the benefits of vaccination in this country far outweigh the risks for the particular patient that does get the vaccine and for the community at large.
Dr. Corey, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Take good care and good luck.
You too. Bye-bye.
We turn now to a new book about conspiracy theories and their role in American political history. Take a look at this.